There are not now, nor have there been, nor will there be any plea bargaining discussions in this case. This is a case where there is no plea bargaining, will be no plea bargaining, and I thought I should make the record clear in that regard. And we've heard all these rumors, and I wanted to put them to rest once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. All right, let's have the jurors, please. Gentlemen, please be seated. And Mr. Yamauchi, would you resume the witness stand? All right, let the record reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Collin Yamauchi is again on the witness stand undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Scheck. Good afternoon again, Mr. Yamauchi. Sir, you were reminded you were still under oath. Mr. Scheck, you may conclude your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Good afternoon, Mr. Yamauchi.
Good afternoon.
Now, we were discussing before we took our lunch break notes, and would you agree that there is an important scientific reason that one makes lab notes that are detailed?
Important scientific reason. Okay, you're going to have to explain and be more specific about what you mean by detailed.
Well, do you believe that it is important for purposes of another scientist looking at your notes and trying to evaluate exactly what you did and how you did it, that your notes be detailed as to what procedures you performed and the order in which you did them?
Oh, well.
We have protocols and procedures manuals that state and explain exactly how we operate and what conditions we use and everything like that's available. Notes are taken to aid in recollection and to help an analyst recall and remember important points that are happening through the examination process.
So you're saying, are you saying, sir, that you have a protocol in place and there's no need to take detailed notes as to what you did and the order in which you did it, because one can just simply assume that you followed the protocol?
Sustained.
Well, in your answer, you just indicated that did you indicate, sir, that it's not important to take detailed notes as to what you did and the order in which you did it, because one can just rely on the assumption that you followed everything that's in your protocol?
Oh, well.
Well, sure, the protocol is there to represent what we do and the manner in which we do it. There are guidelines set up so that the analyst has a way and a reference to know the proper techniques. That's what that's for.
Well, aren't there many important issues of evidence handling that are not addressed in your protocol?
It's vague.
Are there important issues of evidence handling that are not addressed in your protocol?
You'd have to be more specific.
Well, the evidence handling section of your protocol is 2 pages long. Isn't it?
Well, you could show it to me, otherwise I'd have to take your word for it.
Would you like to see it?
Well, if you're going to ask me about it, yes, please.
No problem.
Thank you.
Section 4 of your protocol is entitled Evidence Handling.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yes, that's what it says there.
Well, Mr. Yamauchi, you take a look at it and you satisfy yourself. Don't take my word for anything. You look at it. Does that look familiar to you?
Yes.
Is that the section 4 of your protocol that deals with evidence handling?
If this is a copy from our protocols and procedures manual, I'll take your word for it.
All right, proceed.
Now, Mr. Yamauchi, your section on evidence handling doesn't discuss how swatches, bloodstained swatches, ought to be handled in the evidence processing room when they're collected.
Overruled.
Well, I'd have to read through this thing again or refresh myself completely, but what you're talking about doesn't sound like it's a complete issue for our unit. It sounds like it's an issue that has to do with processing of evidence that would be associated with the crime scene investigation.
So the DNA unit has nothing to do with the way that blood-stained evidence is collected at a crime scene, dried, and packaged in the evidence processing room.
Objection, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Your Honor, this is the PCR protocol.
Sustained.
Oh. Mr. Yamauchi, did I understand your answer to the last question correctly? That the evidence, that the procedures used in handling blood swatches from the point of their collection to their drying in the evidence processing room and their packaging in coin envelopes and bindles in the evidence processing room has no relationship or is not covered under the responsibilities of the DNA unit?
Objection is compound, it's argumentative.
Overruled.
No, actually, they're two separate issues.
So from your point of view as an analyst in the DNA unit, the collection, drying, and packaging of bloodstains is not, for purposes of DNA, stains that are going to be used for DNA testing, is not part of your responsibility.
Objection is argumentative, misstates his testimony.
Sustain. Phrase the question. Do you need to be there with this exhibit any
Well,
longer?
I will be in a second, yes,
All right.
yes, I'm going to be going through this.
My only concern is you're standing between juror number 7 and the
I'm
witness.
sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
All right.
Still experimenting with how to configure myself in this courtroom.
Try and address the witness.
Mr. Yamauchi, when you and Ms. Riley and others were setting up your DNA unit, you did not regard it as part of your responsibility to monitor the methods that were used for the collection and packaging and drying of bloodstain evidence that would be tested in your DNA unit.
Objection is argumentative, assumes facts and evidence.
Sustain.
Did you regard it as part of your responsibility, you meaning the DNA unit, to review and monitor the procedures that were used for the collection, drying, and packaging of blood swatches that would be subjected to DNA testing?
That's the responsibility of the trace unit, and they would be open to any advice that we'd give them. As far as the handling or implementation of any newer protocols and procedures in their end of the laboratory, that's kind of out of my hands. Erin Riley has done training where she's explained handling of evidence and collection, but personally, no, I haven't been involved in that directly.
Was it part of your training? Withdrawn. Did the issue arise in your training that the collection and handling of biological evidence before the formal DNA testing starts can result in cross-contamination of samples?
Well, yeah, of course that's possible, but I don't think it's probable.
Mr. Scheck, why don't you turn the podium to face the witness, please?
I'm sorry. Now, in the evidence handling section of your protocol, is there anything in there about how to handle a suspect's reference to?
Objection beyond the scope.
Overruled.
That's not an issue that this particular area is set up to address.
Is there any section in your DNA protocol that lays out procedures for handling a suspect's reference tube during the process of examining and cutting specimens?
It's beyond the scope. There's a PCR.
Overruled.
I'm really not sure if there is specifically addressing that issue in the detail that you described.
So, in terms of how you handled the reference sample of Mr. Simpson in relation to the other crime scene specimens on the morning of June 14th, we cannot get any assistance from the protocol.
Sustain.
Can we get any assistance from the protocol in terms of the procedures that are supposed to be used in handling a reference sample and crime scene specimens?
objection, that misstates his testimony.
Yes, if we could.
Overruled.
Quite possibly, there could be something that alludes to what you're getting at, but specifically what you're talking about, I'd have to go through and review the notes and that protocol and dig through it.
But as you sit here today, to the best of your knowledge, there's nothing you can recall here that specifically lays out how a suspect's reference sample is supposed to be handled in the evidence processing room when you're cutting crime scene specimens.
Well, as you can see, it's a long protocol. I can't just pull it out of the air. I'd have to go look through it.
Well, can you suggest any section other than the evidence handling section where you would expect to find it?
With that specific detail, what you just described, no, I don't think so.
So in terms of the details of how you handled Mr. Simpson's reference sample and the crime scene specimens on the morning of June 14th, would it be fair to say that the written record we would have to rely upon are your notes?
At this point, yes.
And you mentioned just a second ago that one of the purposes of notes is to aid in the recollection by an analyst when you come and you talk to a jury about what you did and when you did it.
Not so much when I did it, but what I did. And basically, it speaks for itself. We do things in normal, the same fashion, over and over again. And we'll take notes if there's anything that's out of the ordinary or that would be needed to refresh your recollection. It's not something that's overly detailed, and it's not something that you just scribble a few lines on either. Because quite obviously, if you're taking notes, you're not working, and if you're working, you're not taking notes. So we have to take a good balance of both in order to get done what we're intending to accomplish. And that's, in the end, to have something to refer back to in case something becomes an issue and say, yes, I have that in my notes. I can recollect that now. That's what it's all about.
I'm sorry, you finished, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. In the course of your training, did you consult with other laboratories to see what procedures they used in terms of note-keeping?
No.
Have you done many cases since June 14th and 15th of 1994?
Not many.
How many samples do you think you've processed, that is, in the evidence processing room, since June 14th and 15th of 1994?
Objections irrelevant beyond the scope.
Overruled.
I haven't processed any samples in the evidence processing room since then.
You have not.
No.
Have you processed them in the serology lab?
Yes.
All right. And how many do you think you've processed in the serology lab?
That's irrelevant.
Overruled.
I'd have to go back and check the records to be sure.
Think it would be 100 or more?
Possibly.
And you could not remember, without the aid of notes, what you did to those specimens and the order in which you did it.
It's argumentative. Rephrase the question.
Can you remember what you did with those over 100 specimens since June 15th? What you did and the order in which you did it without notes?
You're asking me in general or in great detail? Because in great detail, yes, I would like to refer to my notes, but in general, I know I would have extracted them and went about the normal procedures that I do for the PCR DQ alpha process.
Well, is every case the same?
Sustained.
Did you not testify on direct that it is not your custom or practice to prepare detailed notes on items that you sample?
I'd have to see that in its full context.
Did you tell us on direct examination, if you recall, that you take general approximations? That's how you described your note-taking procedure, your note-taking custom and practice.
So it's vague, it misstates his testimony.
Overruled.
When I describe certain items, yes, I do take approximations.
Now, referring to June 14th and your notes of June 14th in the morning, your notes do not indicate when you received Mr. Simpson's reference to them, do they?
I don't believe so, but let me check. I have the date that I received it as the 14th of June, but not the time.
So, in terms of time, you do not have, your notes do not indicate when you received Mr. Simpson's reference to. True?
That's true.
And they do not indicate when you prepared that Fitzco card.
No, there's no time on that.
And they do not, your notes do not indicate whether you created the Fitzco card before or after you did cuttings on the glove.
No, it's not indicated.
And your notes do not indicate whether you created the Fitzco card before, after, or during your cutting of the Bundy swatches.
No, they don't indicate that.
Mr. Yamauchi, is your memory improving about how you handled Mr. Simpson's reference sample on the morning of June 14th?
Sustained.
Has your memory been improving since August of 1994? I'm sorry, August 19, yes, it's August of 1994. Right, about how you handled Mr. Simpson's reference to.
Well, in certain areas, it would depend on what things I would have to spark my recollection.
Well, in August of 1994, you gave some brief testimony concerning your handling of Mr. Simpson's reference tube and the crime scene specimens.
Okay,
Is that true?
sounds familiar, yes.
You reviewed that testimony before you came here.
Still, that's many pages, and that's a while ago, too. If you got specific areas, please show them to me. I'd like to see them. And then I'll answer questions about them.
In August of 1994, you were not sure if you received Mr. Simpson's reference sample before or after you received the crime scene samples.
Sustained.
I'm asking you.
Questions not properly formed, counsel.
My pocket. In August of 1994, were you sure if you received Mr. Simpson's reference sample before or after you received the crime scene samples?
Overruled.
I'm sorry, one more time, please.
Sure. In August, were you sure if you had received Mr. Simpson's reference sample before or after you received the crime scene samples?
I would have just, at that time, probably been going off of my notes. Overall, that's a closer date to the time when it actually happened, so maybe my recollection was a little bit better. But unless I know specifically what you're referring to, I really can't be of much help.
Well, what I'm referring to is, can you remember whether you received Mr. Simpson's reference sample before or after you received the crime scene samples? That's what I'm referring to.
It's asked and answered.
Overruled.
You mean now, based upon my notes, or you're trying to make me remember what I remembered back then? That's not easy to do.
Mr. Yamauchi, I'm interested in what you can remember now from your own independent recollection as you sit here today and you testify to this jury under oath. Do you know whether you received Mr. Simpson's reference sample before or after you received the crime scene samples, the Bundy swatches and the glove?
I believe I did, yes.
Which, before or after?
Before.
Before. You sure of that now?
Well, judging by my notes and the order of things that are going on, I would say that's the time when I received it.
You received it before,
Yes.
okay? And and those are the same notes that you're looking at now that we just went over with the jury. That's 1185, right? Page 1. Put that up.
Yes.
Same set of notes that you were looking at when you testified in August.
Yes, it should be.
And isn't it true that the best you could remember in August is that it all happened at approximately the same time? That is, that you received the crime scene samples and the blood vial at approximately the same time, but you weren't sure which you received before and which you received after.
Sustained.
In August, wasn't the best you could remember is that it all happened at approximately the same time?
Is that what I said?
Is that what you said? Is that the best you could remember in August?
Well, if you could allow me to review that part of my transcript, I'd probably be better off answering your questions.
Sure. I'm now reading from page 620 of the Griffin hearing. Where you asked these questions, did you give these answers?
He's asked for an opportunity to review the testimony.
I'll not read it to him.
Read it to him.
Question. Yes, on page 620, line number 7.
Mr. Scheck.
Question. So then you received a reference sample on June 14th? Answer, yes. And did you receive that before or after you received the crime scene samples? Answer, I'm not sure. Question, you don't know? Answer, indicates in the record no audible response. Question, was it around the same time? Answer, approximately, yeah. Where you asked those questions, did you give those answers?
Yes, that sounds reasonable.
So in August of 1994, about 2.5 months after you actually were in the evidence processing room dealing with these samples, you weren't sure when you received the crime scene samples in relation to Mr. Simpson's reference sample, right?
Overruled.
Yes, and after we've been through this carefully and I've looked through my notes more, that's why now I feel, but I still, and I've still stated, there's no time on here, so I don't know for sure. But based upon my notes, I have a good feeling that that's when it happened, before I received the other evidence.
These notes that we're looking at, 1185, page 1, same notes you were looking at in August, right?
That's correct.
But now, on direct examination, you specifically remembered that you received Mr. Simpson's reference tube after a conversation with Dennis Fung. Right?
That's right. Since that time, I've had chances to look over my notes more carefully and try to piece together that issue.
Same note, same piece of paper.
That and the rest of my notes,
The other 4 pages?
yes.
Do the other 4 pages say anything about Mr. Simpson's reference sample?
No, they don't.
And you told us on direct examination that you now specifically remember that you went to the end of the table in the evidence processing room by the garage door.
Sustained.
Did you go to the end of the table in the evidence processing room by the garage door with Mr. Simpson's reference tube?
Yes, I recall making the blood swatch card in that area.
And that's where, it was in that area that you now specifically recall you made the blood swatch card.
Not specifically, but generally speaking, it was on that end of the room.
All right? And you now can tell us that you made the blood swatch card before you examined the glove.
Judging by the continuity of my notes and the next page entrance here that you pointed out, I would say, yeah, that's the most likely scenario.
And you now can tell us that you specifically recall making the Fitzgo card with Mr. Simpson's reference tube before you did cuttings of the Bundy blood swatches.
Yes, that goes in line with the continuity.
And you now can specifically recall that you were concerned about wind currents when you were at the end of the table in the evidence processing room handling the reference sample.
Wind currents?
Yeah, didn't you say something about that on direct?
I'm not sure. I don't recall that.
And you now specifically recall an independent recollection, not what you usually do, but you independently recall that you pipetted about 1 milliliter out in your left hand.
I described the procedure that I usually take when I make those cards, and that's to pipette 1 ml of blood out of the tube, the reference tube, and into the pipetter.
Were you testifying on direct examination about what you usually do or what you independently recall doing on the morning of June 14th?
Sustained.
You just said to this jury, when I asked you about pipetting with your left hand, that you were testifying, that's what you usually do. Did you just say that?
Yes, and to answer your question, it's a little of both.
Well, I'd like you to direct your attention to what you independently remember from the morning of June 14th as opposed to what you think you would have done. Okay?
Overruled. Ask a question.
Do you have an independent recollection of walking to the end of that table, the evidence processing room near the garage door?
I have an independent recollection of making that swatch card on somewhere at that end of the room.
Now, on direct, you indicated that you walked around to the end of the table, didn't you?
You're going to have to be more specific about that.
Do you have an independent recollection that you didn't hold the tube in your right hand when you were pipetting with your left, but you put it on a stand?
Yes.
Independent
I-
recollection of that.
I would have to put it on a stand.
And you say you have to put it on a stand as opposed to holding it in your right hand. Are you telling us that's what you would have done, or that's what you independently recall you did?
No, okay, I don't remember specifically, step by step, exactly what I did, and that's why I go back to my normal standard practice and procedures.
But when you testified on direct examination, weren't you telling this jury that you had an independent recollection of exactly what steps you took in handling Mr. Simpson's reference sample on the morning of June 14th?
Objection is argument.
Stay.
Mr. Harmon asked you very, very specifically, didn't he? Did you change your gloves between making the Fisco card with Mr. Simpson's reference sample and then moving on to cut the Bundy swatches? Do you recall that?
Yes, that sounds familiar.
And do you recall when he asked you that question, he asked you if you had an independent recollection that you actually changed your gloves. Do you recall that?
I'd have to see the transcripts. I'm not sure I recall that.
Well, then let's get to what you can recall and what you can't. Do you have an independent recollection as you sit here today that you changed your gloves after handling Mr. Simpson's reference sample and then moving on to cut specimens?
Of course I don't remember independently every specific detail, but once again, my procedure and practice is when I'm doing those blood tubes, I change my gloves.
My question is, do you have an independent recollection that you actually changed your gloves on the morning of June 14th?
Objection asked and answered.
Overruled.
Yes, I do.
You do.
Yes.
Is your memory of those events, handling Mr. Simpson's blood vial, improving since August?
Well, the way you're making me think about it right now, I had to remember back to what I did with those gloves. And now I recall I had those gloves in my hand, they had blood on them. I would have to get rid of them, and I couldn't get rid of them right in that area at that time. I had to go around and either put them into the receptacle behind me or take it back to serology to dispose of those gloves. And somehow or another, that's what reminds me of taking off my gloves at that point.
Just occurred to you as we're talking right now.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to that time and place where I was doing that. And yes, it helped my recollection.
Well, on direct examination, didn't Mr. Harmon ask you about a biohazard bag in the evidence processing room?
He might have.
And that's where you put your gloves? Didn't that come out in the questioning on direct?
Objection, that misstates the testimony.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Mr. Yamauchi, in preparing for your testimony in this case, did it come to your attention that mishandling Mr. Simpson's reference sample in relation to the crime scene specimens could be a very significant error?
Objection, it's argumentative, calls for hearsay.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
In your discussions, in preparation for your testimony, did it come to your attention that mishandling Mr. Simpson's reference tube in relation to the other crime scene specimens on the morning of June 14th would be a very serious error.
Objection, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Did anybody discuss with you whether mishandling Mr. Simpson's reference tube on the morning of June 14th in relation to other crime scene specimens could be considered a serious error?
Mishandling any evidence item is not a good thing. It's common sense.
In your preparation discussions, was it not brought to your attention that mishandling a reference tube is more serious than mishandling other specimens?
Objection, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Was it brought to your attention that mishandling a reference tube could be considered more serious than mishandling other specimens?
Well, given any scenario, of course it could be, or maybe it wouldn't be. The bottom line is you don't want to mishandle any evidence or reference sample.
Mr. Yamauchi, in our short discussion here, did you not say that you have an independent recollection now that blood got on your hands when you opened Mr. Simpson's reference tube? Did you just say that?
Misstates his testimony.
Sustained.
Did you get blood on your gloves when you opened Mr. Simpson's reference tube?
Yes, soak through the paper.
You remember that now?
Yes, I do.
In other words, didn't you testify before that you opened the tube, you did it with a chem wipe?
Yes, and the blood soaks through the chem wipe.
So you're now saying that you have an independent recollection that the blood soaked through the chem wipe.
Along the tip edges, yeah.
And that's something that you didn't even recall when you were asked about this on direct examination.
Was I asked that specifically?
Well, do you recall being asked how you handled Mr. Simpson's reference tube on direct examination and giving a description?
Yes, I recall describing that process.
And when you gave that description, did you include the fact that the blood went right through the chem wipe, got your gloves dirty?
No, I don't believe so.
Because, in other words, it's in our discussion here on cross-examination, this came to you for the first time.
When you started talking in that much detail and you asked these specific questions, giving it to the best of my recollection.
Do you feel confident, Mr. Yamauchi, that your recollection of how you handled Mr. Simpson's reference sample on the morning of June 14th is not affected by how you think you're supposed to answer these questions?
Objection, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you now recall that you put the Fitzco card 10 to 15 feet away from the specimens, the Bundy specimens?
I think I said that on direct.
Yeah. Is that what you remember now?
Yes.
Specifically recall that.
Yes.
But in August, 2 months afterwards, you weren't even sure whether you got Mr. Simpson's reference tube before or after you received the crime scene specimens. Isn't that true?
Objection, that misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
Now, this morning, in reviewing your notes a little bit more carefully, or withdrawn, I shouldn't say that, in reviewing your notes, you agreed that you could have cut samples from the glove before you cut swatches from the Bundy samples.
Yes.
And you began, we know from your notes, and I'm turning to page, well, we renumbered page 3 of the notes, and Your Honor, let the record reflect that when I renumbered the pages, I put a cross through it and I initialed it.
Noted. Thank you.
We move that to the left as we look at it. Now, your notes indicate that you cut the Bundy swatches between 10 and 11 o'clock, correct?
Yes.
And then if we move it up a little bit, move it to the right, left, I'm sorry, the other way. And then you cut the 2 exemplars from Ms. Nicole Brown Simpson and Mr. Goldman between 11 and 11:20.
'41 and '42, yes.
Okay. Now, do you know whether Dennis Fung removed a hair, item number 19, from the Rockingham glove on the morning of June 14th?
I don't know.
Well, you were not there to witness Mr. Fung. Withdrawn. You did not see Mr. Fung remove a hair from the Rockingham glove on the morning of June 14th.
I don't recall that.
All right. You know for a fact, always have trouble with the way you want me to formulate these. Is it true, sir, that Mr. Fung never removed a hair from the Rockingham glove after you did cuttings on June 14th?
Sustained.
Well, after you cut the glove on June 14th, do you have any knowledge of Mr. Fung removing a hair from it?
Objection calls for hearsay, speculation, no foundation.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
Do you know if Mr. Fung removed a hair from the Rockingham glove after you manipulated and cut it?
I don't know if he did or not.
Your Honor, I'd like to put the evidence collection page from 1107 on the OMO.
No, it's been marked for identification.
No, this is an essence. This is paper.
It's minor difference perhaps in procedure.
This is an evidence, Your Honor.
There's nothing in evidence, counsel.
No, Your Honor.
Why don't you approach with the court reporter, please?
evidence based upon the prior testimony of Mr. Fung and Ms. Mazzola.
No foundation, it's hearsay.
Sustained.
In the course of your work at the SID laboratory, is it part of the regular course of business to fill out crime scene identification investigation checklists?
For crime scene investigations, yes.
And is it part of the normal course of business in those crime scene identification checklists to fill out what are known as evidence collection reports?
It's one of the pages in that packet.
And in some of these evidence collection reports, there is a box for sample numbers, and there's a box for item collected and time.
Yes.
And these reports are supposed to be filled out, these reports are filled out in the regular course of business at your laboratory?
The regular course of... Yes, that whole set of forms is what's made available to all of us when we go out to crime scenes.
And you fill out these reports at or near the time that you collect the item of evidence.
You mean me personally when I do a crime scene? Or
You meet criminalists in your laboratory. It's part of the regular course of your business to fill out these evidence collection reports at or near the time that you collect the item of evidence.
sometimes I do, sometimes I fill in a collective where I put the time in from the first item collected and the time in on the last item collected.
All right, but sometimes you will actually fill in the time under the box time.
Fill them all out. Yeah, occasionally I'll do that.
And when you do that, you fill it out. It's the regular course of your business to fill that out at or near the time that you collect the item.
Sure.
All right? And criminalists in your laboratory have an obligation when they fill in these forms to fill them in accurately and truthfully.
Of course.
All right? Now, have you reviewed in the course of this case the crime scene investigation checklist and the evidence collection report filled out by Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola?
Have I reviewed it? No.
Never seen it once.
No.
All right? I show you what has been page 2 of 2 pages of the evidence collection report that is Exhibit 1107, Defense 1107. Is this page one of those evidence collection reports page that's filled out in the regular course of your business at SID?
Yes.
And is it the regular course of your business at SID for criminals to fill that out accurately?
Sure. Yes.
And are they supposed to fill it out sometime at or near the time that they locate the item, collect it, or put in the time?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would offer these 2 pages from the evidence collection sheet of 1107.
It's somebody else's report, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Thank you.
Do you rely on the evidence collection reports of other criminalists in the course of your work on a case?
Do I rely upon them?
Yes.
It's irrelevant,
Oh.
beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Well, I might utilize them in reference.
Would you rely on the information in this report to be accurate, even though you didn't create the report yourself?
Objection, that's irrelevant.
Overruled.
I would assume it's correct.
And I would offer it now.
Sustained.
Would you rely, as part of your formulating your expert opinion about how crime scene samples are handled in this case, would you rely upon the evidence collection reports filled out by Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola?
Objection, calls for speculation. It's beyond the scope of this direct examination.
Overruled.
It's still hearsay.
Overruled.
I think I would rather have a discussion with them and then have them explain and tell me that this is reference material for certain areas. So in other words, what I'm saying is I'd rather have it in conjunction with physically speaking with them. Because they're their notes and, not my own. They might have their own personal styles of writing and taking notes.
In terms of the time that hair and fibers might have been removed from the glove, is the evidence collection report an item that you would generally rely upon in formulating your expert opinion about crime scene samples in a case?
Objection, that's irrelevant.
Overruled.
Once again, I would like to talk to them first to clarify issues and make sure I understand the way that they fill out and address their notes. For one thing, there's times on here, but it doesn't say what date they were collected on. Is there more of this, or?
Let me see counsel without court reporter, please. Thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Mr. Yamauchi, do you recognize these two pages which have been marked Defendants 1107?
They look like part of the crime scene note packet.
A crime scene note packet that is filled out in the regular course of business at the SID laboratory.
Yes.
And looking at the rest of the materials, 1107 in these last two pages, do you recognize this to be the evidence collection report filled out by Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola in connection with this case?
Objection, no foundation. Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
I don't see any initials or anything like that on there, and I can't say that I could recognize their style of writing or anything. But judging by the,
Go ahead. Finish your answer.
judging by the numbers and the other stuff, it seems like it's related to this case.
You recognize these to be the item numbers in this case accord with the item numbers that of the various different specimens that you've been dealing with in this case, and you were dealing with on June 14th.
Speculation, no foundations, hearsay.
All right, Mr. Scheck, we're not going to make any progress in this area. The jury's already heard the testimony of Mr. Fung.
Listen,
Let's proceed.
do you notice on the first page of this evidence, this crime scene investigation checklist, do you see the names Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola?
Objection, that's hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes.
Having seen that, looking at all these documents, do you now recognize 1107 to be the crime scene investigation checklist and the evidence collection report filled out by Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola in connection with this case?
Section calls for speculation, no foundation, it's hearsay.
Overruled.
Yeah, I guess I take your word for it.
All right, let's move on.
Mr. Yamauchi, let me ask you to assume that Mr. Fung removed hair and fibers from the glove at 9 a.m. on the morning of June 14th. Do you have that in mind?
It's improper hypothetical, it's inconsistent with the testimony.
Overruled.
Okay.
Now, if you assume that to be true, would you not agree in reconstructing the events of June 14th that you cut samples from the glove sometime between 9 a.m. when Mr. Fung removed the hair and 10 a.m. when you began cutting the swatches from the Bundy samples?
That's argumentative, it's an improper hypothetical.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
Assuming that Mr. Fung removed a hair from the glove at 9 a.m., looking, based on that assumption, and looking at all your notes, and canvassing your recollection of the morning of June 14th, do you believe it likely that you cut samples from the glove between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on the morning of June 14th?
That's possible, although my notes don't reflect any times as to when I specifically did that.
We understand your notes don't reflect times, but
Not on that particular item. I didn't write the time down.
in reviewing the glove entries with you this morning, did you not agree that in terms of the listing of the items and the order in which you put in your notes, that it is likely that you cut samples from the glove before you cut the Bundy swatches?
Objection, that's argumentative.
Overruled. And Mr. Scheck, you're going to have to remove your items from the prosecution's side of the table.
I'm sorry?
You're going to have to move your belongings from the prosecution side of the table, unless you want to leave them there.
You're right. Better move. You have my last question in mind?
Sorry, could you ask it one more time, please?
In reviewing your notes this morning, did you not reach the conclusion that it was likely that you cut samples from the glove before you did the Bundy samples?
Yes, that's possible, but once again, I don't have it written down and I don't have independent recollection of that, using your terminology.
And assuming that Mr. Fung removed a hair from the glove at 9 a.m.,
Yes?
and combining that with your notes and the recollections you do have of the morning of June 14th, do you not consider it likely that you cut samples from the glove between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on the morning of June 14th?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I'd like to have a diagram I'd like to, 230? Like to mark the fence next in order. This is defendants
1186.
1186.
This is the drawing of the glove.
Now, have you had an opportunity to examine this board, Mr. Yamauchi?
Yes.
And you examined this with Mr. Harmon the other day, Friday, I believe.
Yes, so that's the same board. Yes, that's the one then.
All right. And are you satisfied that the blown up diagrams of the back side, the front side of the glove, and the wrist area where you put your initials are accurate reproductions of what you drew on your serology item description notes?
Yes, it seems to be.
And I guess the phrase we use here is the pull-out lines or the cutout lines that are accurately reflect your own notes about what procedures and manipulations you made of the glove on the morning of June 14th.
Yes, I didn't notice any inconsistencies.
Now, if we assume that Mr. Fung removed a hair from the glove on the morning of June 14th, you have no idea from your knowledge of this case where he removed it from, do you?
Where Mr. Funk? No, I don't know where he removed anything.
And you have no idea whether or not he was wearing the same pair of gloves that he used to handle the crime scene specimens when he removed a hair from this glove on the morning of June 14th.
Of course I don't know what he did.
Now, in your training, have you been taught that it is fundamental criminalist procedure to take a photograph of an item of evidence such as this glove before anyone in the crime lab alters it?
Objection, argument.
Overruled.
I would say that's a good idea, and it's something that I would practice on most occasions. But to give it that much emphasis, not necessarily.
Are you familiar? You've been working at SID for how many years?
5 years?
5 years. Have you ever come in contact with a document known as a crime scene field unit protocol and procedures manual?
Objection beyond the scope of direct.
Overruled.
First time I ever heard about that was during this case.
Well, since this case began, have you had an opportunity to look through the crime scene field unit protocol and procedures manual?
Objection, it's irrelevant.
Overruled.
It's beyond the scope of
Overruled.
No, I've never looked at that.
Never looked at it. In the course, well, you have served on the crime scene field unit for SID, have you not?
Yes, I've had field duties.
You've gone out to crime scene and collected evidence,
Yes,
and you received training on how to do that.
yes.
And some of that training, I take it, is part of the SID oral tradition.
Could,
In other
could you
words,
be more specific about that? What
you
you
were
mean by that?
Instead of getting any written instruction sheets on what to do, you were given oral instruction about what to do.
I've been to a crime scene investigation class from the California Criminalistics Institute, as well as have been to numerous seminars and training sessions at SID.
Did you go to what they call an SID mini academy?
I don't know if that's what it's called, but we had seminars on Thursdays.
Okay. In your Thursday seminars, did anybody ever tell you that before altering the condition of any evidence, it should be photographed?
Objections beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Well, the items of evidence are photographed as they lay in the field by the photographer and the criminalists that are at the scene. And when they come back, well, quite often we'll remove bloodstains and things like that from them. It's not always critical to photo document them at that point. One reason that I would is if I was going to alter it in some way, like make a cutting. And that's, in this case, what I did.
Would you consider removing a hair from a glove, altering it?
It would depend on the situation.
Let's try this one. Would you consider removing a hair from the Rockingham glove, altering the evidence, altering item number 9?
Objections, argumentative, calls for speculations beyond the scope.
Sustain.
In analyzing, you conducted an examination of the glove yourself before you cut it.
Of course, I looked it over.
And you were trying to figure out, in the course of your examination of the glove, what the best areas were to either swab or cut for purposes of DNA testing.
Yes, I was looking for areas to sample.
And would it have been of some importance in terms of figuring out which area to sample to know where a hair had been found on that glove?
Objection, speculation, no foundation.
Overruled.
As far as my analysis is concerned, removing blood, that's not an issue that affects me. It would be something that would be taken up with Trace or the people that analyze hairs and fibers. If that's what you're getting at, I'm not sure.
Did you see a piece of tissue embedded anywhere in the notch area of the Rockingham glove on the morning of June 14th?
Well, to my recollection, I don't recall anything like that, and it's not on my notes.
So to the best of your knowledge, you can't tell us whether there was a piece of tissue in the notch area as well as a hair that was removed by Mr. Fung.
There may very well have been. try not to manipulate that item, overly manipulate it, and I concentrated in on what was important to me, which was the sampling process for
Would-
the DNA PCR.
In terms of trying to determine whether or not there could have been cross-contamination of this evidence item, would it be important for you to know when Mr. Fung touched that glove, where he touched it, and what he was wearing when he touched it?
Objection, it's argumentative, calls for speculation, no foundation.
Sustain.
Do you have any concerns that in the course of manipulating this glove, employees of SID might have transferred small amounts of blood to the glove?
Misstates the testimony, no
Sustained.
foundation.
I'm asking, do you have any concerns that that could occur?
Calls for speculation.
Sustain.
In the course of examining and cutting evidence for purposes of DNA testing, is it important that SID criminalists engage in conduct that prevents cross-contamination?
Of course that's important.
Right? Based on your knowledge of what can cause cross-contamination, would you consider it an unsound practice for Mr. Fung to have been handling the blood swatches from Rockingham and then, without changing gloves, remove a hair from the wrist area of this glove?
Objection, misstates the testimony, calls for speculation, no foundation.
Sustain.
Would it be unsound practice for Mr. Fung to have manipulated the blood swatches and then, without changing gloves, removed a hair from some location of the glove?
Objection, no foundation, calls for speculation.
Sustain.
You don't know what Mr. Fung did in removing the hair from this glove, do you?
No, I don't.
Now, in terms of your own manipulation of the glove, you conducted a number of different procedures before you even did a cutting. Is that correct?
If you're referring to the phenolphthalein test,
Is that one thing you did?
yes.
Now, before you did the phenolphthalein test, did you do anything else in examining the glove?
Well, anything else like what? Could you be specific?
Did you touch it with your hands, with gloved hands?
Did I touch it with gloved hands?
Yes.
Yes, I would have to touch it with gloved hands.
Well, do you know where did you examine the gloves in the evidence processing room? I think you've indicated you did.
The glove, not gloves.
Yeah, this glove,
This
the
glove
Rockingham
right
glove.
here, yes.
And assuming that you did it after you created the Fitzgo card, do you know where, in relation to the Fitzgo card, you conducted these manipulations of the glove?
I remember working on that glove on the, not on the table, but on the bench area next to the paper, the clean paper.
Not on the table?
The table where the evidence was on.
So there's one, the evidence is on the table at the back of the room where the hood is, right?
Yes.
All right. Incidentally, weren't there two other cases going on in the evidence processing room that day?
I don't know.
You don't recall seeing any other evidence items out from any other case?
I I saw a lot of evidence. I don't know if it was all from the Simpson case or it could have been from some other cases.
So arrayed along the tables in the evidence processing room was evidence from the Simpson case and evidence from other cases.
Objection, that misstates his testimony.
Sustained.
Was there evidence from other cases out on the tables in the evidence processing room as well as the evidence in this case?
Well, there might have been. I don't know.
All right. You can't recall as you sit here today.
It wasn't something I asked.
Well, I'm only asking about what you saw.
Okay, what I saw is a bunch of packaged evidence as if it'd been collected at a crime scene, and it was back on that table.
So you do recall seeing other packages of evidence as well as the evidence in this case?
Well, I don't know.
That misstates his testimony.
Sustained.
Other packages?
Oh, I don't know if they were other. At that point, I didn't know if it was related or if you're saying there's another case there, I wouldn't doubt it.
Do you, as you sit here today, have a specific independent recollection as to how far away this glove was when you manipulated it from the Fitzgo card and Mr. Simpson's reference to it?
Well, that was about 10 to 15 feet. It would be about the same as the rest of the evidence.
Now, did you put your initials in the wrist area of the glove first?
No, I initialed it last.
How do you know that?
That's my practice.
Okay. You don't independently recall it, it's just the way you do things?
I remember doing it last.
And when you initialed that glove, you had to grip it in the wrist area in order to write your name, didn't you?
I don't recall, but possibly.
And you proceeded to do a series of phenolphthalein tests on this glove.
You mean after I initialed it?
I thought you said you initialed it last.
Right. So, well, you said you proceeded, and so I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Do you know where you started? It would be in area A?
It's most likely that I followed that ABCD pattern.
All right.
Makes sense.
So you did a phenolphthalein test by taking a Q-tip and swabbing area A. Is that right?
I took a clean Q-tip, moistened it with sterile water, and then swabbed that area.
All right. And then you did a cutting.
That sounds reasonable.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. Did you do all the phenolphthalein tests first and then do cuttings? Or did you do a pheno and then a cutting? What did you do? Do you know?
I don't remember.
Okay. Okay.
Specifically, I don't remember.
You don't remember. And when you did your cuttings, did you use that scalpel again with just one hand?
When I do cuttings, I use a scalpel, and yes, I can manipulate it with one hand.
So do you actually have an independent recollection that you cut the glove at every point indicated as sample cutting with just one hand without gripping that glove with the other hand?
Might have gripped it with the other hand.
All right. And you did, looking at the palm side, 2 pheno samplings and a cutting on the inside area labeled C in the wrist area of the glove.
Yes.
And you did pheno tests, 2 of them, on the back side of the glove in the wrist area.
Yes.
And at the end of this process, you initialed the glove on the inside in the wrist area.
Yes.
Your Honor, I think that,
Yes, good point. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess for 15. Please remember all of my admonitions to you, and we'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Mr. Yamauchi, you can step down. Your cross-examination.
when you were taking samples from the glove, were you in a hurry?
No.
When you were cutting the Bundy swatches, were you in a hurry?
No.
Now, you mentioned on direct examination that you have one of these little badges that you put up next to the door, and that admits you into the evidence processing room.
Yes.
And you're familiar with computer printouts entitled card transaction reports that reflect when somebody goes into the evidence processing room.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to show you what's already been marked as People's 226, a serology transaction report, and I'd like to also show you defendants next in order. What would that be?
1187.
1187. And I'd like you to compare 1187 to 226 and tell us if 1187 is a fair and accurate summary of all the different entries on the transaction report for June 14th into the evidence processing room that bear your name. And just to help you out, it's page 1.
Objection, 226 is hearsay at this point, it's not an evidence.
Overruled.
What's the door number on the evidence processing room? Can we confirm that that's the evidence processing room?
Well, the 226 was introduced by the people as the transaction report of that room.
I have an objection.
That's testifying.
Hearsay, Your Honor.
All right,
That's
I'm sorry.
testifying, counsel.
And I object that document is hearsay and the witness is unfamiliar with, there's no foundation.
Overruled.
Ask you to assume it's door number 18 and the 226 is the transaction report. Door number 18 is the evidence processing room.
Okay, if I assume that, then I can go
Yes.
on.
Thank you.
Do you need a straight edge, Mr. Yamauchi?
Thank you, but I'm okay.
Right.
Who's on to page 4?
This one? Okay. Okay.
Mr. Scheck.
Okay.
Is that 1187 accurate?
Under the assumption that this is from the evidence processing room for that particular date, yes, it is.
Objection, Your Honor, there's no foundation. It's-
Overruled. Yes.
Okay, now, the transaction record would indicate, these are all entries, correct? That's how the system works?
Yes.
All right. So it shows you entering at the evidence processing room at 8:17, and then presumably sometime between 8:17 and 8:31 you left, because you re-entered again at 8:31, correct?
That's a good assumption.
Okay. Now, let's look at how many times you left between 9 and 10 o'clock. Okay? At 9, we see you re-entering at 9:15, correct?
Yes.
And we see you re-entering at 9:27.
Yes.
So that would mean that sometime between 9:15 and 9:27, you left the evidence processing room and then re-entered.
It's a good assumption.
And then between 9:27 and 9:49, you left and then re-entered at 9:49.
Yes, that's reasonable.
And at 9:49, between 9:49 and 9:59, you left and re-entered again at 9:59.
Right.
And all those exit and entries between 9:15 and 9:59 occurred during the period of time that you were manipulating and cutting samples from the glove.
Objection, that misstates the testimony.
Sustain.
All right. If we assume that you started manipulating and sampling the glove sometime after 9 a.m., would it be fair to say that you entered and exited the evidence processing room at the times indicated on 1187 during the period that you were manipulating and cutting the glove?
Objection calls for speculation, there's no foundation.
Sustain.
Do you recall entering and leaving the evidence processing room while you were manipulating and cutting the glove?
Well, to begin with, we just went over that section of my notes, and yeah, I said it was reasonable to assume that sometime between, I guess, what was it, 9 and 10 or so, that's when that was analyzed, but I don't remember specific details as to what I was doing and what time I took samples, and at certain points I would have had to go get the photographer too and have him come by to photograph that item. So, I don't know.
The photographer in question is who, if you recall?
It's either John Taggart or Mike Wilson.
Well, looking at the entries on 226, tell us entries you see on the morning of June 14th for Taggart and Wilson and the times.
Objection calls for speculation, no foundation.
Overruled.
John Taggart, 824.
Okay, hold on.
Uh-huh.
Given your reconstruction of the events of the morning of June 14th, do you believe that Taggart entered at 8:24 and took a picture of the glove before you manipulated and cut it?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
As best you can recall, given your notes and records and recollection, Did Taggart come into the evidence processing room at 8:27 and take a picture of the glove?
Like I said before, I don't know if it was John Taggart or Mike Wilson.
All right. Would you look at the transaction report and see if there's, when the next entry for Taggart or Wilson is?
For Wilson, it's 8:47.
All right. Do you recall Wilson entering the evidence processing room at 8:47 and taking a picture of the glove?
I don't recall which one of them did it. I asked John Taggart to take the photograph, and I'm not sure if he did or if Mike Wilson did.
So, you are certain, are you not, that the photograph taken of the glove was after you had manipulated and cut it?
No, I had it photoed beforehand, before I did the cutting.
Didn't you testify on direct examination that the photograph of the glove was done after you initialed it, manipulated it, and cut it?
No, I don't believe so.
Mistakes the testimony.
Say, rephrase the question.
Do you recall what you said on direct testimony with respect to when the glove was photographed, before or after you manipulated it and cut it?
On June 14th.
Well, I'm sorry?
On June 14th.
On June 14th.
I believe I said before, because the whole idea behind photographing it before is because I was going to cut it. So I wanted to have a photo documentation of it as how it looked before I did the cuttings on it.
Have you ever seen a photograph of the Rockingham glove in a condition prior to the cuts you made on it?
Which assumes facts not in evidence.
Or will.
Seen quite a few photographs of that. I don't know if those were the ones or the set that I had requested.
You requested a set of photographs from the prosecutors to review before you testified.
No, I didn't. For that particular issue, I'd have to go back and check the records to make sure that this set that I've seen in the past is the set that happened on that date and time.
Where would you go to check?
I'd probably have to talk to Mr. Matheson.
All right. And after talking with Mr. Matheson, do you believe you could determine whether or not there is in existence a photograph of the Rockingham glove taken at SID that reflects its condition before you manipulated and cut it?
Yeah, there should be.
I would ask you if you could do that for us.
Right now?
Well, why not? Sometime after court today.
Okay.
Now, when you were putting up page 5 of your notes. Page 3 of your notes with respect to your cutting of the Bundy swatches. Now, you recall on direct examination that you took out some envelopes and paper, and you demonstrated for the jury how the process that you went through in cutting the swatch, putting it in the bindle, putting it into the test, putting a part of it into the test tube, and packing it. You went from one to the other. Do you recall that?
Into the microcentrifuge tubes?
Yes.
Yes.
You recall standing up in front of the jury here and taking out those envelopes and demonstrating?
Yes, I recall that.
Okay. Now, when you did that demonstration, didn't you leave out one aspect of your activities that you engaged in when you cut the swatches?
Well, what aspect is that?
Well, I call your attention to your notes, page 3. When you were going through the process of unpacking the bindles, cutting the swatches with a scalpel in one hand, with that same hand putting it into the microcentrifuge tube, and before you repackaged them and went to another bindle, didn't you make a drawing?
Yes.
So that was part of your activities as you went through the Bundy samples.
Yes.
You made the drawing that appears here as page 3 of your notes.
Yes.
And when you made that drawing, you tried to be as careful as possible in outlining the shapes of each swatch.
No, I just made a approximate rendition of what I saw.
Well, on some of these, for example, take 49, didn't you make little renditions to try to indicate folds?
Yes.
In particular, I call your attention to the, I think you can see it as item 49. If you travel along the top right hand, the top of the line, all right, you see 6 little renditions of swatches, correct?
Correct.
And the 4th one over from the left is drawn in such a way to indicate a fold.
Yes.
And many of the other drawings here, you tried your best to indicate irregularities in the sizes and shapes of the swatches.
Yes, I try to do that approximately.
And you didn't take a picture of the swatches.
No.
That's not a practice in your laboratory.
No, it's not. It's never been an issue.
Okay. Now, this process of cutting the swatches and drawing them, you did carefully.
Well, I took some care in it, but keep in mind, these are approximations. I don't want to say that they're exact duplicates of the exact size of them.
No, I'm
It's
not
just
talking now
to
about
get
the
a general
drawings.
idea.
Not talking now about the drawings. I'm talking about the process of opening the bindles, cutting the swatches with one hand, putting the swatches into the microfuge tube, making your picture, repackaging the swatches. You did all that carefully.
Of course.
You didn't want to rush through that, did you?
No.
Because you weren't changing gloves.
Well, if something got on my gloves, I would change it, or if I had inadvertently touched a swatch or something, then I would change it. But I do my manipulations with the scalpel blade, and so there isn't necessarily a need to change my gloves.
I thought it was your firm testimony, well, I'll rephrase it. I thought it was your testimony that you were sure that you had not touched a swatch with your glove when you went through this manipulation process and cutting process of the Bundy swatches.
You're right, I don't recall touching any swatches.
Okay, you're sure of that?
Yes.
Didn't change your gloves?
I wouldn't see any reason why I would have to, no.
And you actually told us, I think this morning, that with respect to sample 49, two of these swatches were actually stuck together and you had to pull them apart.
Sustain.
Now, you did these cuttings, well, let's see, 117, there was a total of 4 swatches?
No, there's 2 swatches and 1 control.
Well, 2 swatches and 1 control, so that would be 3.
In total, yes.
And for sample 49, there was a total of 6 specimens and 1 control for a total of 7.
Yes.
And for sample 50, there were 4 specimens and 1 control for a total of 5.
Yes.
And for sample 48, there were 2 specimens and 1 control for a total of 3.
Yes.
And for sample 47, there were 7 specimens and 1 control for a total of 8.
Yes.
And you went through this entire process of cutting the swatches with the one hand, putting it into the test tubes, drawing your picture, opening the bindles and closing the bindles. You did all that in 1 hour.
Yes.
And that would come down to, on an average, about 12 minutes per item.
Yes.
And you're certain that you didn't touch any of the swatches with your glove,
Yes.
and you weren't in a rush.
I wasn't in a rush.
Now, you testified on direct examination to, well, let me move back for just 1 second. And during this process of doing the swatches, you went in and out of the evidence processing room between 10 and 11?
Yes.
Yes. The chart indicates an entry at 10:05, 10:54, and 10:59.
Okay. Yes.
Now, when you received these coin envelopes from Dennis Fung, each of them was closed. I'm talking now about the Bundy samples.
They weren't sealed.
But they were closed.
Yes.
And you opened them up.
Yes.
And you looked at the bindles.
Yes.
And you did not see one initial of Andrea Mazzola on any one of those bindles from the Bundy samples, did you?
Well, if it was there, I didn't note it. I noted the number down there.
And there was no count on the coin envelopes or the bindles indicating the number of swatches that had been originally collected.
No, that wasn't listed on there.
And the original packaging, that is the plastic bags that the swatches were initially put in, those were not preserved or present.
No, I don't recall seeing plastic bags.
Right? And we cannot test now the plastic bags, the blood on the plastic bags, to compare that, any DNA typings from that blood with the typings from the swatches, can we?
Well, for one thing, if I didn't see the plastic bags, I really can't even testify as to their existence.
Okay? Have you ever used plastic bags to blood swatches?
Objection beyond the scope.
Sustained.
In
Mr.
your
Scheck, why don't you turn the podium towards the witness, please?
I'm sorry. In your experience in the evidence processing room, have you ever seen the plastic bags that the wet swatches are brought in?
Yes, I've seen that in my experience, and I've used that technique myself.
And invariably, do you not see blood stains on those plastic bags?
There winds up with a residual amount of blood left on the plastic.
Now, in your training and readings as a criminalist, have you not been taught that all original packaging of evidence items ought to be preserved as the chain of custody of an item proceeds?
Objection, it's argumentative, calls for speculation.
Oral.
Well, that's up to an interpretation too, because if you think about it, what's important is the swatch itself. That's what's going to be analyzed. This background piece of plastic that it's being placed on is just something that's supporting it. It's not intended to be analyzed. What's intended to be analyzed are the swatches, and that's what not initially, but eventually gets dried and booked into evidence.
Chain of custody refers to the practices of criminalists to ensure that the items collected are actually the items tested and presented in court.
That sounds reasonable.
And in the course of your training with respect to chain of custody, have you not heard that it is a standard practice to preserve all original packaging materials for an item?
Yes, and I think that's specifically designed to look at items of evidence such as a glove or something that's animate, not something that's a blood swatch where you're collecting a stain on the wall or something like that. See, the reason why is if say you have a glove, things can fall off of that, and you would want to preserve those pieces of trace evidence for further analysis. And that's one place where the trace people will look, would be inside the packaging housing that. But when we're talking about a blood swatch, what we're interested in are the types on that particular stain. If you consider that plastic, that's all that's doing is acting as support to dry the stain and or transport it. It's not changing any of the types that are on that particular stain. What's important, Mr. Scheck, is the stain itself and the information that can be gained by that.
Well, following through with what you just said with respect to the original packaging containing traces of the item collected, is it not true that these plastic packages would contain blood from the original swatches?
Yes, but you've got to...
Is that true? Yes or no?
He's explaining.
Let him finish answering the question.
All right, please finish.
You've got to understand, I mean, common sense will tell you this too. If you've got a blood stain and you put it on the plastic, it's not going to be different on the plastic than it would be on the swatch itself. If you have a glove and you put it in a package and some of the, maybe a hair or fiber or something falls off, then that's going to have evidentiary value. And so, of course, you're going to want to change or save that packaging because it's got stuff in it that's important. But the residual amount from a piece of plastic that's supporting a blood swatch is insignificant. What's important is what's on the swatch.
Let us assume, Mr. Yamauchi, that the swatches originally collected in the plastic bag are not the swatches that were put in the bindles. Are you with me?
You can make all kinds of
There's no
assumptions.
basis for that hypothetically, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, could you not scrape blood off the original plastic bags that contain these swatches and do a DNA test to find out what types would come from that blood on the plastic bag?
Yes, that's possible.
Right? And then one could compare the blood on the original plastic packaging to the blood types one got from the swatches.
That's possible. Well, why wouldn't you want to just go directly to the swatches themselves?
And if the typings from the plastic bag, blood from the plastic bag, were different than the typings from the actual swatches, wouldn't that raise a concern with respect to tampering with evidence?
If you cause for speculation, no
Sustained.
Did it raise any concern in your mind that there was no count on either the bindles, the coin envelopes, or any document you could find as to how many swatches were originally collected?
It's compound beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Once again, this has never been an issue before. And what's important on these swatches is the DNA or the genetic marker types that are going to be found through scientific testing. Number is not going to tell us the quantity and quality of DNA or the quantity and quality of any enzymatic typing or antigens that we would need to look at. So it's never been an issue.
Evidence tampering, as far as you're concerned, has never been an issue in your laboratory.
Sustained.
Has evidence tampering ever arisen as an issue in your laboratory?
That's bad faith, Your Honor.
Overruled.
No.
Were you ever questioned by investigators from the district attorney's office, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Stevens, concerning the handling of the blood swatches in this case?
Relevant cause for hearsay is no foundation for this.
Sustained.
Were you aware of any investigation conducted by the district attorney's office or anyone else?
Sustained. It's irrelevant.
Now, on direct examination, withdrawn, one more question. In your examination of the bindles, did you notice anything unusual?
No.
You said that when you received the blood vial, Mr. Simpson's reference sample, it was in the gray envelope.
Yes.
Got that from Mr. Fung.
Yes.
The envelope was not sealed.
No, wasn't sealed yet.
You needed to look at your note to refresh your recollection on that?
Certainly, I wanted to be sure. I knew it was written there.
Do you recall testifying in some detail on direct examination about the envelope not being sealed?
On direct, I don't remember if that was asked or not.
Do you recall being asked whether it was normal in your experience at the SID to receive a reference sample envelope that was not sealed?
I might have been asked. You want me to just answer the question?
I'm asking if you recall saying that on direct.
Well, if I was asked that question, I would say it's not normal, but it's not out of the ordinary or extraordinary.
Well, my first question to you is, do you recall testifying, being asked that question, questions to that effect on direct examination, and giving answers about whether it was normal to receive an unsealed envelope with the blood vial?
Somewhere along those lines, it sounds familiar, but I can't be sure if that was asked in exactly that fashion or not.
Do you recall discussing with Mr. Harmon or Mr. Goldberg or any of the prosecutors the issue of the blood vial, the envelope, not being sealed?
Yes.
How long were those discussions?
Not very long at all. They asked me if it was or was not, and I told them, no, it wasn't. They asked me if,
Excuse me, you said no, it wasn't?
Your Honor, this is about the 100th time
Yes.
today.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Scheck,
I'm sorry.
it is at least the 10th time. There won't be an 11th, will there?
Your Honor, my apologies, but
Proceed.
I'm allowed to object when the answer is not responsive.
You are, but you're not allowed to interrupt the witness when
My
they're
apo-
testifying.
You go ahead, Mr. Yamauchi.
okay, where was I?
You were telling us about your conversations with the prosecutors, and they asked you whether it was normal to see an unsealed envelope containing a blood vial. You gave him an answer that it wasn't, and then you were about to say something else.
Occasionally, we work on evidence items that have not yet been booked. And so for that reason, it's not completely out of the ordinary.
Is it your understanding of procedures concerning the taking of blood from a suspect that after the nurse draws the blood from the suspect and hands the vial to the requesting officer, that the envelope is then supposed to be sealed?
Objection, no foundation.
Sustained.
Have you examined the envelopes that contain the blood vials?
Well, obviously, I looked at this one.